stories. As a female who has been playing World of Warcraft for 15 years now, I've met a lot of creeps, but only a few have made me feel unsafe. To start off, I've always had a laptop since I was in high school, a luxury back then. I worked hard to earn enough money to buy one. My mom almost took my money I earned for drugs, but luckily money I made in tips were in cash, so it was easier to hide it from her. At first my mom was mad I bought myself a laptop, but she soon forgot like everything. My dad could care less, and my older brother already had his own, so I started playing World of Warcraft with him at 14, and back then, girls were unheard of. So I got the usual creeps who usually backed off after hearing my age, or they were young too. But not this guy. This guy loved that I was underage. I was about 16 and used to creepy guys at this point, no longer a noob at the game or fending off the creeps. It was no longer a surprise. A new guy in the guild started hitting on me. Now I was 16. Dumb, young, horny, and stupid. But I knew I wasn't going to find love on World of Warcraft, where you knew no one in real life. Plus, I had the ultimate crush on a guy I could not have because he was my brother's best friend. But in my mind, back then, I only wanted him, so it was easy to turn guys down despite being desperate as hell for one guy. But all of that changed after my brother's friend went off to college. I had a part-time job with my brother's friend, but girls at work surrounded him and I became demoralized. I'd never find love. Cue 19-year-old guy on World of Warcraft who made me feel wanted. I had a camera phone, so I could send and post pictures at that age. And back then, I mostly used Facebook, MySpace, and PhotoBucket. I lost a lot of weight my sophomore year, so I posted confidently bikini pics and sexy pictures, thinking I'd lure the attention of my brother's friend, whom was 19. So when this guy, who was also 19, liked me, it didn't faze me. He looked the part in his photos, and his younger brother was my age, so I thought he was extremely attractive in his photos, and even proved it was him in his pictures by holding items I asked for. He started paying my World of Warcraft subscription, which in the long run, I realized it was to get my home address and my real name. I was so stupid and heartbroken over my brother's friend. Years of teaching myself online safety and the ability to be strong against flirts was all but lost in the fog. We had talked for hours on Ventrilo, and he'd make me feel pretty. I was completely blinded by this point. He sent me gifts, and I didn't even question how he had my address. Then he offered to drive and pick me up. As only then I suddenly get cold feet. I had a good friend on World of Warcraft, someone my brother met at PAX and joined the guild, and is still one of my best friends to this day. He was 6 years older than me, but never creeped on me. Was more like the protective brother I lacked. He caught on to it through conversation, and was my words of wisdom in a time I was lacking any of my own. He saw something was fishy when I could not. I told my friend I was scared to meet him because dumb teenager logic. I thought he would not like me. My friend chimed in that I shouldn't meet anyone off of the internet at my age. I told him about the gifts, and I swear I have never been scolded like this in my life, not even by my own parents. But He always cared like that. He wondered why I would give my address to someone I had never met, and the expensive gifts I got were not something the average 19-year-old could afford. None of this ever clicked for me, of course, because I was lonely and trying to prove, I don't know, to myself, my crush, or something, I could get a boyfriend. Like that, I told the guy it wasn't wise to meet in person, and my parents said I wasn't allowed to. That's when it went dark. At first it was pestering over and over, guilting me over gifts he gave me, and encouraging me to defy my parents, while he kept bothering me. It never once occurred to me he'd lose his shit, while my friend was worried shitless about the guy having my address, going as far as to drive the 11 hours to my house and explain the situation to my dad, as I refused to tell him out of fear of getting in trouble at the time, all while taking his spring break in my state instead of his own with his friends. There's a reason he's still one of my best friends. He has a little sister of his own as well, and she's my age, so his protective nature is natural. Eventually, he made me block the guy, and that was that. This guy was pissed off. He'd go on different accounts to accuse me of gold digging and using him. Luckily, my friend was smart enough and had the foresight to change my World of Warcraft password, and even paid for my account for me taking this guy off it entirely, as one of this guy's threats was to delete my account. But it did not end there. It got worse, as he'd constantly find ways to message me and tell me how horrible I was. Until about a month had passed. I was walking home from school, about 2-mile walk in wealthy suburbs of New England, which I had done for years. Many kids did it as well. It was a very safe town with no crime in it or surrounding towns. Without second thought, I took off with my backpack, put my headphones in, and started my 20-minute walk home. It was cold, so I had my earmuffs over my headphones, only drowning out sound more too. I swear, if I could talk to myself as a kid, I'd probably just slap myself for stupidity, because World of Warcraft guy knew I walked home every day. As I talked about it, he knew my address, and I never thought twice. I was on the back roads walking home, and honestly, easy to map from my school to home, as it was pretty straightforward with only one turn. At halfway home, in between songs, I heard a vague crunching sound of tires rolling over gravel on the road slowly. I turned around to see a tinted black car that you couldn't see much of the person in front. I jogged out of the driveway I was standing in front of, assuming it was waiting to turn in, but it didn't turn in. The roads were dead, and it didn't make sense for him not to go around. I swear, the saying that you go cold when you are terrified is absolutely true. It could have been a summer's day at 95 degrees, and my bones would have been cold. My heart just sank, and my breathing was uncontrollable. I felt like I had no control over my body as I realized this guy was following me. My blood truly ran cold, and my hands shook as tears formed and my skin felt tight. It only got worse as the second time I turned my head to see the car stop. I stopped. My world stopped. I couldn't stop staring, just froze and breathing like all my school books were on my chest, crying silently. My eyes hurt, with no tears or sound, as I just stood there. The door opened after what felt like hours, but only seconds, maybe a minute, and it was in fact him. It was the attractive guy from the photos, not a catfish, but something seemed different. At first I thought it was his angry expression, but soon realized he was definitely not 19, more like 30 plus. I could barely think over the loud sound of my heart racing as I stood frozen in place. I thought I was about to puke as I just stood there, and he spoke to me. He told me to get in his car or he'd light my house on fire and kill my dog. I honestly could not move. I could not reach my phone, and like some magic, we both failed to notice the little old lady on her porch watching this play out. Suddenly, I hear her yell, "Get away from that little girl right there before I kill you, you son of a bitch." We both turned to meet her eyes. Pissed off, small lady about 60 or 70 with white hair. I think she noticed me frozen in fear as she told me to get over to her quickly. Like that, I ran over to her, tossing off my heavy brick of a backpack. It was obvious he was unsure what to do next as he stood there and watched me run over to her. Must have been a sight, this tiny, thin old lady standing in front of a teenage girl yelling at this man to go away. Like that survivor number 2 joined the battle as her husband stepped out. Guy who looked like he had been through a war or two, with a shotgun of all things, and booming voice, gun pointed, saying, "I have shot and killed men for less reason. You better fucking leave now." He got back into his car and drove off as I simply collapsed. All that fear just came out as I cried harder and harder as my brain sifted through the past few months of mistakes. After calming me down enough to speak in non-hyperventilating words, she asked me if I knew him. I told her kind of, but only online, from a video game, not real life. Of course, explaining it wasn't easy. She got on the phone with the school counselor, her daughter apparently, and told her my name. I was well known to her daughter, ironically, but it was only 250 or less kids in the school, and the town itself was small. Many staff at our school had family in town. Kids at school there were related to each other by their own children or their siblings' children. It was the kind of town you didn't leave. By a certain age, you were stuck there. So honestly, it seems ironic, but entirely not a huge surprise. The counselor was well aware of my family and my mom's drug addiction, as child services had been involved a few times. She came by in 10 minutes to pick me up and ask me a ton of questions, of course, knowing I did not want to involve the police, as I was scared of being taken away from my parents again. We weren't rich, but we were more well off than many. Though my mom worked, my dad kept my mom on a tight budget to keep her from buying prescriptions from Canada she wasn't prescribed. She knew all of this and knew, though rough, I was better off than foster care, which was a gamble with losing odds at best. Plus 2 more years and I'd be off to college anyway, so we didn't involve the cops. But she made me promise to take the bus every day and to inform my dad of the situation. She also called my dad at work to inform him, and had a teacher make sure I got on the bus every day until I graduated even. Really sucked, but I understand. If it ended there, it would have been nice, but there's still a bit more, and I'm sorry for the length and the grammar. It's a late night, and I'm recalling from memory and typing on my phone. 2 days after this, my dad had to fly out for business. My brother was off at college, so it left me and my high mom, who promised my dad she'd stay sober while he was gone, but I was used to helping her while she was high. It was like taking care of a child. But I was on edge, as ever. Creak Inn, that big house from the 60s, cat stir at night, and dogs barking outside, set me on edge. I barely slept. My friend from World of Warcraft called me every night, making sure I was okay for the past month. I lived in the middle of the woods, next to a huge river, in my backyard, so there was still a lot of wildlife outside in the dead silence of cold months. Running water is an important source of water when lakes freeze. I had been used to all of the bumps in the night, cats coming and going and dogs barking at every animal in the yard, but it all seemed new to me as I laid in bed trying to drown out my fears. The house I grew up in was a 6-bedroom house. I had a little sister too, but she stayed with my grandma in another state per court order while I was allowed to choose due to her only being 9 and me 16. The other rooms were used as a game room, an office for my dad, and a guest room for my sister when she visited with my grandma, and she had a room. So, in a large house like that, in the middle of the woods, it was scary to virtually be alone because my mom was completely defenseless because she was high. I was letting my last cat inside for the night, and at the end of the long driveway between my neighbor and our house was parked a black car. I quickly shut the door and locked it after my cat got inside. I made sure all 5 doors were locked and even put cardboard on the glass doors to the pool. I don't know, hoping if he broke them, it would delay him if the car was his. I went through the house and turned off all of the lights and got all of my cats into one room so I knew they were safe. Here's the thing about my dog. He's untrained for the most part, but was basically a giant lab puppy in his mind. But he growled at strangers, not barked like animals. We had to keep him inside if we had guests, but he never bit anyone. And if you spent enough time around him, he'd eventually accept you. Also, he didn't growl at all strangers either, so he wasn't the most reliable guard dog either, but he was big and had a deep bark. I mulled over what to do as I sat there in the dark with my dog waiting for a shadow to pass by the window. I eventually went upstairs to my mom's room and woke her up from her sleeping pill slumber. Groggy and still kinda high, she didn't quite grasp what I was telling her until I started crying. She sorta sobered up and asked me to get her some coffee, so I did, all while I'm watching my dog's every move because I knew he could sense something before I did. As my mom sobered, her fear in her eyes grew. Eventually, she got the idea to call my neighbors and ask them if they knew the car. The neighbors said that they didn't know whose car it was, and 2 men went out of their house to check the car out. The car was empty. At closer inspection, though, they noticed it was a newer car, a Lexus, and in the passenger seat was a laptop. The car was locked, but with a flashlight you could see somewhat into the tinted windows. They never told us why, but something they saw in the car prompted them to call the local sheriff. Only one, and he lived in town, sorta. We were too small to have a police department. He drove over about 15 minutes later, ran the plates, and asked the houses around about it. Apparently, it was a rental car from Ohio, and he was calling to see who rented it, but the offices were closed, I think. He stuck around his car for about an hour until someone came out of the woods and ran back in as the cop turned his spotlight on him. I couldn't see what he was pointing at with his light. He called for backup as 3 other cops showed up in 5 minutes from the neighboring town and highway patrol, at which a lady cop got out and asked to speak with her and call my counselor from school to explain who that might be. During the search, the police found something I didn't think about checking. The basement door was not just unlocked, but open. It's never unlocked, so I didn't even think to check it, as our backyard floods in the spring due to beaver dams, and it's got extra seals and stuff to prevent the basement from flooding again, but that stuff sealing it, which was mostly sandbags and stuff, were set aside, but the door at the bottom of the stairs was locked. Still, though, it had some damage, like someone tried picking. He had access to half the basement that was storage. The door between the section was like a front door, as in the summer my dad left the hatch open to dry out the basement and adjust pool settings, as it was basically the pool house and the cats loved it, so it also had a few cat beds. The section that led upstairs was locked from the inside, and the wall and the door were not drywall and cheap door, but lock and key, heavy door and wall was brick. My dad confirmed he had not left it open. My suspicions that black car was his was pretty much confirmed. As we walked through the house to make sure everything was still safe, the female officer got on my laptop as they searched the woods. I gave her everything I had, his photos, username, and she even checked to see if his credit card was still on my account, but it wasn't. But the last few digits were. She then asked to take my laptop for a few days, as she thought she could get some good evidence from it. I asked her to please not damage it and return it as soon as possible, because I used it a lot before smartphones. It was all I had. After a few hours and onlooking neighbors had gone to bed, the cops came back empty-handed, but left a cop outside our house and towed the guy's car away. From what the lady cop told me, what permitted such fear was in the car there were 2 guns, some sort of rope, and handcuffs, and the guy who ran back into the dense woods was wearing a winter ski mask. So eventually, I tried to lay down and go to sleep, and I'm pretty sure I was going to call out sick tomorrow, and kept all my cats inside for the day. I was too restless to sleep. Every sound made me so scared. My mom slept with the dog in her room, and my cats slept in my room most nights by choice, as my room was usually the warmest. At around 3:30 a.m., I heard a knock on the back door, and a guy say, "Undercover police officer, open up." I was still awake as I walked downstairs to make out a guy standing in the dark with a gun. As he saw me, he demanded I let him in now, as he needed to speak with me. Something felt off. The guy's voice seemed forced, like someone purposely making their voice deeper. And why was he at the back door? So I turned on a light outside, and sure enough, it was him. I just screamed. As quickly as I screamed, he started hitting the door hard. Wasn't a very loud horror movie scream, but more like a gasp scream. I don't think the fear in my body had a loud scream to let out, but the banging was pretty loud. As I ran to the front to see if the officer was still outside. He was, but he wasn't getting out of his car. I didn't want to run outside, as I'm not a fast runner, so I turned the porch light on and a couple of times, but still nothing. After a minute, my dog came bolting down the door, barking and growling and foaming at the mouth. Soon followed my mom, who yelled she had a gun. She didn't, but bluff is bluff. Somehow, during all this, the cop outside had snuck around back and had his gun pointed at him, yelling to put his gun down. I wasn't needed in court for the trial, and my statement was enough. Come to find out, he wasn't even American. The car was rented under his friend's name, and after all was done, he was deported back to Canada. I assumed something with his passport would prevent him from coming back to the United States, as the cop reassured me he couldn't come back to the United States now. I don't know exactly what he was charged with, but I think my dad said aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and something else. And it also turned out he was 32 years old, not 19. So I assume me, being a minor, carried a charge. Wow, do I have a crazy story for you guys. Sorry if it's been a little long. This experience has caused me a lot of anxiety, and it actually feels therapeutic typing this out. During my freshman year of college in New Hampshire, a girl in my dorm hall accidentally caused a small dorm room fire by leaving popcorn in too long, like 3 a.m. We all had to evacuate, and the fire trucks came and the RAs made a pretty big stink about it. The girl who lit the fire was the subject of many yik-yak jokes, and I felt bad for her because she really wasn't attractive, and she looked pathetically lonely, and plus causing microwave fires seemed like a pretty innocent mistake for such harsh comments. A couple of days after the incident, I saw her in the resident hall and made casual small talk by asking her how things were popping and kinda just checking up on her because I felt bad. She laughed, and that was kinda it. A conversation of about 2 minutes. Fast forward to a week later, and I hear a knock on my door, and the same girl, who I am now going to refer to as Popcorn, comes literally running into my room with no hesitation. I didn't even tell her my room number, and at the time, I just figured she just saw me go in there once, because she didn't even know my name at this point. It takes me a second to realize that she is in full-blown tears. There is a stranger on my bed in tears, and I am just like, So I counsel her, like the bleeding heart I am, and ask what's wrong. She tells me that the black dining hall cook sexually assaulted her, and the college wouldn't fire him, and she was suffering emotionally because of it. Being a victim of assault myself, I really sympathized with her situation and gave her my phone number in case she needed help. Walking to the dining hall with a safety net and whatnot, I don't take sexual assault lightly. The night after our conversation in my room, I got a call from her to walk her down to the dining hall because the black cook that assaulted her was working that day. I walked her down to get food, and she just lit up like a glow stick, and a whole new person emerged. It didn't matter that her assailant was in the room. She was talking my ear off about Pretty Little Liars, One Direction, etc. A lot of things I just didn't really care about. But then again, she had no one to talk to, and the situation was complicated. I just listened and nodded my head. Over the course of about 2 weeks, give or take, I had walked her down to the dining hall, maybe about 4 or 5 times. She may have been a victim of assault, but she was also a very annoying and unappealing person For God's sake, she actually talked about herself in third person. Her story about the assault became inconsistent. There was always new major developments about what had happened. The story was changed to something much more drastic and severe. It went from assault to full-on gang rape as her story developed. Then she made a comment one day along the lines of how she wished that someone would drop a bomb on black people so they would finally learn to stop raping. It made me immediately uncomfortable and unsettled. I didn't want to walk her down or interact with her anymore. The week of Thanksgiving reprieve, I went back home to visit my family while Popcorn stayed on campus. During that week, I had 60 missed calls from Popcorn. One day, I even had 20 times the calls in the span of a couple of hours. No normal person does this. Immediately, I saw red flags. When I got back to campus, there was a knock on my door, and sure enough, it was Popcorn, crying again. She tells me that because I wasn't on campus to protect her, she was raped by a Muslim guy while walking to Panera Bread, and the Filipino RA groped her and slapped her boobs. If red flags were being raised, then this was full-blown sirens. I'm not a rape apologist by any means, but the rape-to-ratio rate was exponentially high, especially since these 3 assaults happened within a month's time frame, all by people of color seemingly at random. She was making these stories up to elicit some sick form of sympathy, and as an actual victim of assault, I was beyond offended. I told her I had to leave for class and ran the fuck off to my friend to ask for advice. It got really crazy fast. I warned the RA officers about her, and they told me that they would talk to her. During class, I was up to 100+ missed calls and a series of individual messages that just said hi. I was done with this shit. I wanted nothing to do with her. I blocked her number and went back to my dorm. That week after classes, I just went straight to my dorm. I did not want to see her. One day, I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked to the stall to do my business. I'm just casually in there peeing with my pants around my ankles when Popcorn literally fucking crawls on the bathroom floor and dips her head underneath the stall and says, "Ha! I knew you would eventually come out." I am freaked the fuck out. In near tears, I tell her I'm wicked busy, I don't have time for her, and that I was upset for her invading my privacy. It took a lot of courage to do because I struggle deeply with confrontation. She tells me all about how she is thinking of dying because her mom died when she was young. Some manipulative shit that I was just not in the mood for. I leave her in the bathroom and go to my room and lock the door. I watched some YouTube and took a nap when I was rudely awakened by not knocking but pounding on my door. I did not answer. The pounding just continued and got louder. "Open this door or I'm going to kill you. Open the door or I will kill you. Open this door or I will kill you." And she just waited and waited outside of my dorm, singing songs into the door cracks for an hour. I was so scared, I just cried and called my dad to pick me up from school. I didn't have many friends that lived on campus since it was a small college and a lot of people commuted, and this whole situation just made me feel so isolated. My mental health was deteriorating rapidly. The RAs had been informed that the threats made at my door by other students observing what happened, and she was giving a warning, but that was all. One day, I had my boyfriend, who lived 3 hours away at the time, come to spend the night at the college. We had been watching a movie, and now we were napping on the bed when we all hear the door open. Like an idiot, I had completely spaced out and forgot to lock the door. Popcorn comes running in and jumped on the top of us and says, a baby voice, "Popcorn wants cuddles." I was beyond creeped out and was basically screaming, "What the fuck?" My boyfriend, being the no-nonsense confrontational person that he is, told her to get the fuck out of the room. She told him she would, and I quote, "just go and die like her mother did when she was 3 and inject cancer into herself." My boyfriend smiled and said good, and then pushed her out of the room and slammed the door, giving 0 fucks. And I swear he almost slammed her fingers shut. I love him. We reported her to the campus police in the morning, and still nothing major came of it. That was until there was another popcorn fire in her dorm not too far after, and she got kicked out. I wish that's where the story ends, with her, but unfortunately no. After she left the dorms, my resident life became a lot easier. I made a lot of new normal friends, and I was feeling a lot less anxious. One day a girl in one of my classes invited me to go to the mall with her to go get our nails done. Now this nail salon had clear glass so you could see the rest of the outside mall when you were getting your nails did. I'm all relaxed when all of a sudden I see Popcorn's fucking face pressed up against the glass in this nail salon, and she is with a morbidly obese Neckbeard. I'm getting my nails done, and she is literally staring at me through the window for a good 10 minutes with this man. To say that I was unnerved was an understatement. I told my friend what was going on, and we booked it out of there, and they tried hard to follow. In retrospect, that is when I should have called the police. After the mall, I had a bunch of random friend requests from profiles with a small dorky dog as the profile pic and several message requests. I opened them, and they were from Popcorn asking me to be her bridesmaid at a Pizza Hut wedding that her and her fiance were having in 2 years. I can't even make this shit up. There was another message about how she was so upset that I didn't acknowledge her at the mall, and she had been waiting for so long to introduce me to her dotting fiance, and she was so upset with me that she wanted to wring my neck. Of course, I blocked all of those profiles, and things were pretty silent. I've been living with my boyfriend and going to school in Rhode Island for 2 years currently. I'm loving school, and I have an excellent group of friends. About 5 months ago, I had gotten home from work, and I had 3 missed calls from a random New Hampshire number. Thinking it was one of my family members, I called back, and nope, it was Popcorn on the other end. I immediately hung up. There was also a voicemail left on there. That was just a person breathing into the phone telling me that I was expected to be at the wedding. I cried and called the police urgently about the number. I don't know what happened, or if anything did come of it, but I haven't been bothered since then. I am a very kind person, and people often take advantage of my openness. It really is a fatal flaw that I am working really hard on. It's unfortunate that there are so many unhinged and lonely people, but we really shouldn't make it our burden to help them. Sometimes being nice can actually cause a lot of mental strain. To Popcorn, let's not meet again.